Marilyn Monroe as Rosalind Tabor. By the time The Misfits hit theaters in 1961, Marilyn Monroe's embodiment of Rosalind Tabor had already stirred discord among commentators. Crafted by Arthur Miller, the role aimed to reveal a more serious facet of Monroe, yet many perceived Rosalind as irritatingly docile. Coverage then depicted her as lacking direction, with the New York Times calling her a woman in search of a goal but never attaining one. Rather than propelling the narrative, Rosalind merely drifted, responding instead of initiating, which caused the film to lose momentum. Some surmise that Miller's screenplay laid bare his deteriorating union with Monroe, though this remains up for debate. Filming complications further aggravated the project. Monroe's repeated no-shows delayed production, reportedly exasperating director John Huston and co-stars Clark Gable and Montgomery Clift. Biographer Donald Spoto contends that Gable allegedly told Huston, "She's going to give me a heart attack," but clear corroboration is lacking. Tragically, Gable died from a heart attack 12 days after filming ended, igniting conjecture about the production's stressful climate. The film underperformed financially, with many observers pointing to its wandering plot and Rosalind's minimal impact. While some present-day scholars reevaluate her character as a commentary on women's roles, in its era she was largely perceived as feeble and unfocused. The Misfits turned out to be Monroe's final finished movie, and her depiction of Rosalind remains among the most contentious parts of her repertoire. Ingrid Bergman as Joan of Arc. Ingrid Bergman's portrayal of Joan of Arc in the 1948 film Joan of Arc was meant to be a landmark in her career, but it swiftly became one of her most scrutinized. While Bergman had previously embodied a version of Joan on stage in Joan of Lorraine, her screen performance faced disapproval. Many observers regarded her portrayal as overly saintly, missing the fiery conviction that defined the historical figure. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times described the film as a tedious and creaking screen drama, and numerous reviewers agreed that Bergman's Joan felt more like a solemn martyr than a fearless fighter. The script's heavy-handed dialogue and reverent tone only cemented the character's one-dimensional quality, making it hard for audiences to empathize with her plight. Adding to the film's struggles was the public scandal surrounding Bergman's personal life. During production, news of her affair with Italian director Roberto Rossellini ignited a major uproar, resulting in widespread condemnation in the press. It is often argued that the controversy overshadowed the film's release, souring audience reception. Financially, Joan of Arc struggled to recoup its $4.6 million budget, earning only $4.1 million. Though not a total flop, it failed to meet its lofty ambitions. Bergman's performance earned her an Academy Award nomination, but the film's lukewarm reception signaled a downturn in her Hollywood standing. Only years later, with her Oscar-winning role in Anastasia, did she fully reclaim her star status. To this day, Joan of Arc serves as a cautionary tale of how even esteemed actresses can stumble when a role lacks the breadth to capture its historical inspiration. Audrey Hepburn as Rima. Rima, the inscrutable forest dweller of Green Mansions, 1959, was envisioned to convey mystery and fragile allure, but instead became one of the most derided female roles of the era. Observers found the character poorly structured, as her supernatural mien clashed with an underdeveloped storyline and stilted dialogue. Reviews of the time labeled Rima uninspiring, with the New York Times describing her as a wisp of a character who lacked dimension. Hepburn's polished grace, while admired in her other parts, felt unsuited to Rima's presumed wild upbringing, prompting allegations of miscasting. Difficulties in production only exacerbated the film's problems. Script alterations, on-set misfortunes, and minimal synergy between Hepburn and Anthony Perkins led to a disjointed vibe. Some analysts theorized that director Mel Ferrer's position, both as Hepburn's spouse and the film's helmsman, might have muddled casting choices, though no direct proof supports this idea. All the same, Rima remains a cautionary emblem of how a character's promise can evaporate on screen, transforming what was intended to be a captivating role into one of classic Hollywood's most unremarkable portrayals. Katharine Hepburn as Mary of Scotland. Katharine Hepburn's portrayal of Mary, Queen of Scots and Mary of Scotland, 1936, remains a textbook case of miscasting. Critics deemed her performance too modern, with Variety noting that she resembled a determined New Englander more than a doomed Scottish queen. The film's script took sweeping liberties with history, casting Mary as a tragic romantic heroine in place of a politically complex monarch. Some historians believe this toned-down characterization robbed the real Mary of her calculated ambition, making her appear passive instead of formidable. The film's romantic angle with Bothwell, played by Frederick March, failed to connect, with a number of observers theorizing that the two stars' off-screen discord bled into the final product. While Mary of Scotland was a commercial letdown, its precise impact on Hepburn's notorious box office poison reputation continues to spark debate. What endures is the striking reminder of how historical figures can be reduced by Hollywood's craving for amplified drama. Susan Hayward as Lillian Roth. Lillian Roth's portrayal in I'll Cry Tomorrow, 1955, was meant to be an unfiltered take on addiction, yet the dramatization was criticized for its pronounced sentiment. While Susan Hayward's performance received praise, some reviewers felt the film relied too heavily on sensationalism instead of nuance. The New York Times labeled it forceful, but observed that its depiction of addiction verged on misrepresentation. Roth herself was reportedly torn, appreciating the spotlight on her ordeals, but lamenting that the screenplay oversimplified her experiences. Many argue that the studio favored dramatic flair over verisimilitude, shaping Roth's character into a cautionary symbol instead of a thoroughly realized individual. Though the debate persisted, Hayward's work earned an Academy Award nomination, and later comparisons to her role in I Want to Live, 1958, suggest that her most layered performance came afterward. Whether I'll Cry Tomorrow endures as a gripping biopic or a vestige of dated storytelling remains open to reconsideration. Bette Davis as Fanny Skeffington. Fanny Skeffington, the titular figure in Mr. Skeffington 1944, is frequently singled out as one of the most criticized female characters of classic Hollywood. Presented initially as a glamorous socialite, Fanny's development hinges almost entirely on her waning beauty and her need for male approval. In contrast to the strong-willed women Bette Davis had famously portrayed, Fanny is depicted as submissive, her self-esteem eroding as her looks fade. Reviewers of the day considered the film's messaging overly moralistic, with the New York Times calling it a study in overwrought sentimentality. The movie's quest for poignancy often strayed into overblown theatrics, and Fanny's makeover, achieved through layers of unconvincing prosthetics, functioned more as a distraction instead of a resonant pivot. Various accounts suggest Davis herself felt dissatisfied with the result, with biographer Charles Hyam stating she avoided seeing the finished film. Even though Davis earned an Academy Award nomination, the role stands out as a rare lapse in her otherwise commanding filmography, best remembered for its exaggerated cosmetics and outdated themes rather than any enduring significance. Jean Simmons as Ophelia. Jean Simmons' portrayal of Ophelia in Laurence Olivier's 1948 Hamlet remains a point of contention. While the film secured the Academy Award for Best Picture, Simmons' performance elicited varied reactions. Several reviewers lauded her otherworldly aura, but others believed her Ophelia was too subdued for a character tumbling into insanity. Writing for the New York Times, Bosley Crowther commended her visual elegance, yet remarked that her portrayal lacked the gravitas needed to fully convey Ophelia's tragic downfall. At merely 18 during production, Simmons had limited exposure to Shakespearean acting, which some surmise might have restricted her readiness to handle the role's intense emotions, though others faulted Olivier's formidable on-screen presence for eclipsing her portrayal. In spite of these observations, Simmons went on to carve out a respected career, eventually garnering praise for films like Spartacus and Elmer Gantry. Debbie Reynolds as Tammy Tyree. Tammy Tyree in Tammy and the Bachelor, 1957, was meant to be endearing, but reviewers deemed her insufferably naive. The character, a sheltered backwoods girl who falls for an injured pilot, leaned heavily on outdated stereotypes of wide-eyed innocence. While the film was financially successful, contemporary critiques dismissed Tammy as overly saccharine, with the New York Times calling the story thinly plotted and sentimental. It has been proposed that the character's heightened purity made her feel more like a caricature than a person, limiting the film's emotional depth. The role became a double-edged sword for Debbie Reynolds. The film's theme song, Tammy, which she performed, topped the Billboard charts, reinforcing the character's sugary image. Though Reynolds charmed audiences, Tammy's limited nuance reportedly frustrated her, with later interviews suggesting she found the role too simplistic. Without a clear arc or growth, Tammy remained static, an idealized vision of innocence rather than a fully realized individual. The franchise continued with Sandra Dee and Debbie Watson taking over the role in subsequent films, further highlighting how interchangeable Tammy was. Unlike other iconic female leads of the era, she offered little room for subtlety, becoming more of a marketable brand than a compelling character. While Reynolds eventually shook off the Tammy mold, the role remained a defining, if confining, part of her early career. Loretta Young as Katie Holstrom. Katie Holstrom in The Farmer's Daughter seemed tailored for upbeat Hollywood fare, but even in its era, the character drew notice for being overly simplistic. Played by Loretta Young in the 1947 film, Katie is a Swedish immigrant whose overblown inflection and idealized descent from housemaid to congresswoman felt more like a fable than a realistic portrayal of political ambition. While the role earned Young an Academy Award, various commentators questioned whether the character had enough complexity to merit such distinction. Critical opinions at the time were mixed. Variety praised Young's allure but noted the film's contrived elements, while others deemed Katie's progress too convenient to be believable. As time passed, the character was reevaluated as a product of Hollywood's inclination to romanticize immigrant experiences rather than depict them with subtlety. Some film historians propose that Young's Oscar victory was influenced by the industry's preference for wholesome, audience-friendly acting instead of layered performances, though this remains somewhat contested. Nevertheless, Katie Holstrom endures as an illustration of how Golden Age Hollywood frequently placed charm above genuineness in its female leads. Rita Hayworth as Salome. Rita Hayworth's portrayal of Salome in the 1953 biblical epic Salome stands as one of classic Hollywood's most puzzling reworkings of a historical figure. The real Salome, notorious for the Dance of the Seven Veils and her part in John the Baptist's death, was recast here as a misunderstood romantic lead. Instead of a calculating and manipulative woman, the film turned her into a reluctant pawn in palace politics, stripping away the intrigue and danger that made her legend endure. Reviewers of the period were split, with the New York Times calling the film sumptuous but shallow, while Variety noted that the character fell short of the sharp edge needed to make an impact. Some historians maintain that the studio deliberately watered down her darker qualities to suit the era's moral codes, but this decision left her seeming tame compared to other biblical epics. The film's liberties with the source material, including an invented romance with a Roman soldier, only further distanced it from its origins. Despite Hayworth's undeniable star power, the role failed to capitalize on her talents, turning what could have been a commanding rendition into a forgettable one. Although the film boasted elaborate production values, it struggled to eclipse grander, more ambitious biblical spectacles of the decade. Olivia de Havilland as Rachel Ashley. Rachel Ashley and My Cousin Rachel, 1952, is intended to be a masterclass in ambiguity, but instead, she left audiences exasperated. The character, a widow whose true motives remain obscure, was too impenetrable for many viewers. Various commentators contended that her lack of clear motivation made her seem remote rather than compelling. Was she a cunning femme fatale or an unjustly maligned individual? The picture refused to provide answers, which vexed audiences expecting a more conclusive finale. While Daphne du Maurier's novel thrived on this indeterminacy, the transition to film proved less fruitful. Reports indicate it faltered at the box office, though exact numbers remain debated. Others later reappraised its moody storytelling, but Rachel Ashley endures as one of the more polarizing female leads of the era, too inscrutable to truly connect. Jane Russell as Belle Starr. Jane Russell's take on Belle Starr in Montana Belle, 1952, was meant to convey the notorious outlaw's grit, but the end result felt disappointing. The historical Belle Starr was a cunning survivor, yet the film transformed her into a polished Hollywood archetype, stripping away the qualities that made her fearsome. Analysts remarked that the character fell short in complexity, with reviewers describing her more as a glamorous saloon ornament than a formidable outlaw. Although shot in 1950 and released 2 years later, the film's belated premiere prompted speculation that the studio had little faith in its prospects, though no official paperwork confirms this. A number of commentators assert the film's uninspired script and recycled Western tropes doomed it from the outset. Even director Alan Dewan, known for his Western credentials, couldn't muster enough drive to elevate the material. With modest box office returns, Montana Belle quickly vanished, leaving Belle Starr's cinematic legacy an unfortunate misstep rather than a defining portrayal. Claudette Colbert as Cleopatra. Claudette Colbert's portrayal of Cleopatra in Cecil B. DeMille's 1934 epic remains a frequent point of discussion. While the production dazzled with elaborate sets and costumes, multiple reviewers at the time felt the script reduced Cleopatra to a theatrical figure, downplaying her political acumen. Period reviews from outlets like the New York Times acknowledged Colbert's charm, but questioned whether her performance carried the gravitas expected of the legendary queen. The movie was a financial success, yet later comparisons to Elizabeth Taylor's 1963 Cleopatra often framed Colbert's version as less commanding. Some observers speculate that Colbert herself was never entirely fond of the role, though no definitive statements confirm this. Regardless, the work remains a visually striking, if not universally praised, interpretation of the Egyptian ruler. Sophia Loren as Catherine Hubsher. Catherine Hubsher in Madame Saint-Jean, 1961, was intended as a bold, clever portrayal of a historical figure who rose from laundress to nobility during Napoleon's reign. Instead, commentators described the protagonist's depiction as missing dimension, with some reviews stating she resembled a one-note stereotype more than a multifaceted lead. The film, primarily a historical drama rather than a comedy, garnered mixed notices. Some praised its lavish production, while others criticized an uneven script. Although not a complete misfire, Madame Saint-Jean failed to leave a lasting impression, and Hubsher's characterization remains one of the more forgettable roles of its time. Certain observers believe the film's lighter touch diluted the complexity of Hubsher's real-life ascent, reducing her to exaggerated mannerisms rather than a resonant central figure. Regardless, the film soon slipped from public view, overshadowed by more memorable historical dramas of the same era. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.